On this episode of The Clarity Code,
What have you learned from the smaller companies that you've worked with that would benefit an enterprise organization?
The small companies, have, I think, sometimes more of a bias towards action, which, bigger companies are more bureaucratic and you're kind of trying to move the ship. At smaller companies, they could be more nimble. I think also their scrappiness leads to creativity, which means a campaign with a smaller budget could outperform a bigger company's a larger budget.
Do you ever feel like your video content is getting clicks, but nothing is actually happening? On this episode of The Clarity Code, I sit down with Brad Schlachter, a sharp and seasoned fractional CMO and full funnel growth marketer who's helped scale brands at every stage, from AI startups to global powerhouses like Disney, Hallmark, and Intel. We're going to dig into what it really takes to build marketing that drives the customer acquisition, boost conversion, and actually reduce churn. Content that's not just clicky, but sticky. And if you've ever struggled to prove ROI, connect brand storytelling with data, or turn analytics into action, this one is packed with clarity that you can use. So, Brad, welcome to the Clarity Code.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Brad, I'm curious, just right off the bat, you work with let's say, a new company. How do you establish trust as a fractional CMO in a high stakes and super fast paced environment?
Yeah, it is about, building relationships and trust is really important in order for you to be effective. I think a great way to do that is try to get some early wins, still that are strategic, that tie back to business goals, but you can achieve pretty quickly and easily. I also think it's important to show empathy for sort of maybe their current constraints or challenges. Let them understand that or sort of feel their pain. Um, and I just think, generally speaking, being very transparent, and direct, and when you say you're going to do something, do it, and over time, that's hopefully going to lead to a more trustful relationship.
I love that. I think it's all about that personal connection and the trust. And I'm curious, your history precedes you with all these larger organizations. What have you learned from these large companies that translate to how you market with some of the startups that you're working with?
Yeah, I think one of the things that larger companies tend to do well, is, well, obviously they have more resources, and so they have some of the built-in advantages. A lot of times they have built-in brand equity, but they typically take branding very seriously, and making sure the brand is has the right positioning strategy and is really conveying what's different and better and special about the product or the service. Smaller companies sometimes rush through that step in order to kind of just start driving sales or driving revenue. I also think small companies can learn from big companies just in terms of how serious they take, attribution in terms of reporting and data governance, and they don't treat that lightly. And I think that's a good lesson for any company of any size.
I love that. How about the other way around? What have you learned from the smaller companies that you've worked with that would benefit an enterprise organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's where kind of the marketing challenges sort of make it more fun and interesting a lot of times at smaller companies, because don't typically have the same resources, and you have to become creative. It's not just about turning up the marketing budget. You've got more typically limited resources. So I think it shows the small companies, have, I think, sometimes more of a bias towards action, which, bigger companies are more bureaucratic and you're kind of trying to move the ship, but it takes some time to turn the ship or move it. At smaller companies, they could be more nimble. Um, I think also their scrappiness leads to creativity, which means even a budget or a campaign with a smaller budget could outperform a bigger company's a larger, budget.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot, and it comes down to maybe having too many cooks in the kitchen at some point
Yeah.
where the creativity can be a little bit limited, but still sticks within the brand. So, do you notice that within the smaller companies that maybe there's not as much emphasis on brand guides and sticking to that and just more of an energy to start a campaign and the creativity? Or do you feel like the smaller companies actually do really well with holding on to their core brand identity?
I think smaller companies tend to do better. They have, I think, more of a bias towards action, and sometimes, they don't let good be the enemy of being perfect or great.
Yes.
And but on the flip side, sometimes that bias towards action can go too far if they haven't really fully developed or refined their brand positioning strategy, tested their key messaging, making sure that what they're stating, resonates with their ideal customer profile. They intuitively probably all know or think they know what that is, but sometimes it hasn't been formalized and it hasn't really been fleshed out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd love to talk a little bit about scaling with substance. Brands are always looking to scale, and I think one of the big reasons that I've looked up to you as a marketer in the industry is that you're always talking about scaling with substance and having something substantial with the things that you're marketing. So let's talk about one of the things that you have referred to as clicky and sticky marketing. Tell us a little bit about that, and how should companies pivot from, say, vanity metrics into meaningful engagement?
Yeah, I always like to say, you need content or ads or campaigns that are both clicky and sticky. You can't just look at click through rate. Obviously, what's ultimately the most important is conversions and driving revenue. Um, Marketers are guilty of sometimes, boasting about vanity metrics if they don't really have anything. If conversions or sales or revenue aren't going up to or aren't meeting expectations, sometimes they try to pivot with, well, we drove more traffic or our click-through rate has gone up 20%. And not that that doesn't matter. Those metrics do matter to a degree. But they really should be viewed as directional, not in terms of those types of metrics really shouldn't be driving strategy. And so I always, more importantly is like, well, once someone clicks on your content, whether it's an ad or onto your webpage, what happens next? What do they do? How long are they sticking around for? Looking at engagement metrics like session duration or page views, or obviously ultimately, conversions and going through the funnel. Um, so, you need to focus on both. And I think it's also true in social media, where people like to talk about number of fans or followers. And again, there is some value in that, but ultimately it's about engagement and what they do and um, not just how many clicks, or views you're getting.
What do you think would be the metrics that they should focus on? I mean, you say conversions. What would be a practical example of how we would look at things that really matter instead of just the vanity metrics?
Yeah, it obviously businesses are different and they have different business models. So what's successful for one company or what quantifies or defines success for one company isn't always going to be the same for another. So I think you need to be upfront about, okay, what does success look like? If you're a subscription service, and I've worked with a number of those, um, sure, it's great if someone gets, views your content, you're increasing your brand awareness. But then if they come to the landing page and they don't sign up, they don't take any further action, um, that you can obviously try to get them back with retargeting, but obviously you're not meeting your goal. I mean, if your goal for most people in a subscription service, it's about getting, new customers and getting more paying subscribers. So, it's um there's the top of the funnel is important and getting people there, but then, are they going through the funnel? Where are they dropping off? What learnings can you get from that? And it isn't always about the video content or the ad. A lot of times the problems could also lie on the landing page and the website. And, if those pages aren't optimized for conversion, or if they have a lot of extra friction in the sign up process, your conversion rates are going to suffer and you're going to be spending more money than you should be.
Yeah, statistically, we have 8 seconds or less once we see a web page to decide if this landing page is gonna meet my need or not, right? And so if we have such a small amount of time, it has to have the right verbiage, the right messaging, and everything like that. And you mentioned it's not just about video content, which I completely agree with you. Does video content actually help that stage of the funnel where someone finally clicks through, gets to your page? Have you noticed that there's less drop off, any change in churn rates, anything that video does to substantially help convert?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a number of clients and, you do a lot of A/B testing, and there's definitely certain types of products and categories where once you get to either a homepage or a landing page, um, when some type of an explainer video, something that lets people quickly
Sure.
understand what this is about, what service or benefit or does your product or service offer. Because not, especially startups, who maybe um, developing a new category, it's not going to be immediately obvious. You don't want to assume that when someone lands on a page, they immediately know what your product or service is about, especially if you're sort of pioneering a new category. So, video is a great way to educate people and overcome that marketing challenge. Um, I think, sometimes I don't want to get too into the weeds, but, you probably don't want to have audio on because that could drive people away, but you want to have, allow the user to initiate turning on the audio for the video and other things, just to reduce bounce rate and things like that.
People are actually consuming video content with the audio muted in general.
Yes.
So we live in this world where we're based on captions and all that.
Yeah.
So I would agree with you that giving the option to press play is always beneficial instead of bombarding them
Yeah.
with a
And,
lot
and
of
especially
sound.
on social, I don't know the exact stat, but the majority of video content on Facebook and other platforms is viewed without sound. And so you're right. Not captions are important.
I'd love if you can walk us through a basic idea of what does a 90-day activation framework look like for you? How would you typically run, test, learn, and scale specifically video content in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it starts always with doing an audit and learning about what's working and what's not working. Um, and then it's about testing, different campaigns, different calls to action, different imagery, um, different messaging. So you get key learnings on the type of content and messaging that resonates with your audience. And it's not just about the messaging. I mean, it's also this ties back to the brand, which we talked about, earlier. Messaging could let your consumer know what's important from a rational perspective, like why do they need this? Why should they try this? But brand is what makes it memorable and what helps you connect to your audience on an emotional level. So you need to have both, need to combine both of those things. And then from the testing and learning, then it's about iterating and scaling.
And what advice would you give a client that you're working with who's tempted to pause the execution because, um, like a campaign is underperforming or not going the way that they expected? Is your thoughts, keep on, press on, or what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, if you're spending a lot of money and you're not getting the return, you need to, you need to adjust it. But I would certainly uh, recommend, maybe turning down the volume, and do some more A/B testing versus pausing. As you probably know, when you pause campaigns on whatever platform, it could be Meta, it could be Google, you're going to lose momentum. All these platforms and algorithms go through like a learning phase. If you pause something and restart, you're kind of hitting the reset button. So I think the better approach most of the time is to just scale back on the budgets, but then start making sure you're doing more A/B testing to see what's going to resonate and what's not resonating, so you get those key learnings. And then also, you need to look at the conversion funnel because maybe the ads are performing just fine, but then you're going to a landing page and the landing page is not doing its job. Um, and that's not the fault of the campaign.
What are some best practices that you've seen in your past about specifically video content creation and making an ad that is effective?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, marketing is both an art and a science. It's about
Right.
brand as well as the messaging and performance marketing. And so the best creative, and this applies to video, but it'll apply to other mediums, is you need to have um, first of all, to stand out today, you need to have a strong hook really within the first few seconds, right? You need to kind of catch people's attention right at the beginning. Um, you need to have a hook that resonates. You need imagery that's memorable or resonates that is helping tell a story. And you really need a strong call to action and making that call to action visual. I think those are sort of some basic best practices. Of course, it all depends on who you're trying to reach, and every company is going to have slightly different nuances to what's gonna be successful for them, but it is about that learning and grabbing people's attention and making the call to action really clear and compelling.
I'm sure, Brad, that in your history, you've worked with the large organizations with visual teams, and then you've also worked with smaller companies that outsource everything. How do you deal with working with a designer or a video company and your vision and their execution just don't line up? How have you handled situations like that?
Sometimes you partner with the wrong agency or the wrong designer and, that happens, but, um, you really as a marketer, you have to you have to make sure you're doing the right onboarding, and I think you need to be really clear on what your objectives are. There should be some type of a brief that defines the target audience, the tone, the personality, the key messaging, all those things. So, everyone deserves and should be getting very clear direction. Um, and that's the best way to get the desired outcome you want. And then hopefully, if you have someone who's competent and could take direction well, you should be able to get to where you need to be. Sure, there's times you're going to maybe want someone who, they might lack skills in certain areas that are important to you, and that maybe it's not going to be a fit every time. So
Yeah, for sure. Not everything is a fit, but I think what you mentioned really resonates with me is that clarity is king. Having the communication, having that onboarding properly handled will make all the difference in the outcomes. Do you have any simple process or metric that you would encourage a marketing leader to adopt like today that would help them get unstuck from sort of like the surface level metrics or things that they're kind of stuck on? Do you have any advice for that?
yeah, and we've talked a little bit about the conversion funnel, right? And you can't just look at the top of the funnel. You need to, get people through the funnel all the way through a conversion, whatever conversion is gonna mean for you. But ultimately, that should be driving revenue. And I think one thing that you could do is just, take a look at that funnel, make sure you have all the tools you need to see what the top of the funnel is in awareness, how many people were then going into an engagement and consideration, and then the final step being, a purchase or a free trial or whatever the conversion is. And if you're seeing a drop off of more than 40% at any one of those steps, that's a big red flag, right? And so, I think that's one way that you can do sort of a quick audit and a test, and they'll give you a good idea of what the priority should be.
Do you have any idea of an emerging trend with B2B content marketing, let's say this year that you've seen recently that marketers should pay attention to? Anything that you feel like is kind of new that shouldn't be just let go by the wayside?
Yeah, I don't know how new it is, but because marketers have been talking about segmenting and personalization for a long time. Um, but with the growing improvement of tools and AI, is thrown into this, with the marketing tools that are becoming available and the AI tools that are rapidly proliferating. You know, I I think that the segmentation for specific audiences, and whether that's through email platforms or even ads, that's becoming an ever growing and an important trend.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. AI is obviously a really big deal in 2025. Which AI tools have you seen be the most effective for marketing campaigns and marketers in general?
Yeah, look, certainly ChatGPT is a great tool, for marketers and other people. But it's really also, we talked about direction being important for having good outcomes. And so providing the right inputs or the right prompts, are going to be really critical to having, getting good data and good insights. Um, and then, for me, it's just nice to see that most of the tools that we're already using, whether it's a HubSpot or a Meta or a Google, the level of AI integration, and features that they're adding, are continue to evolve and continue to get smarter. There's obviously, sometimes you wanna do things manually, and I'm not a big advocate for sort of putting everything in AI's hands, or, deferring exclusively to recommendations from Google or Meta. But certainly
Right.
those tools, are getting stronger and are, making it easier to target your audience more effectively.
You know, Brad, one of the biggest trends that I've noticed in marketing for my brands that I've been working with is people just want the human connection, which I think is a really interesting time where we have the desire for that human connection rising at the same time we have AI really making its mark on society. And so I feel like it's just a really interesting nuance that we have to use AI to help us be, more aggressive with our, timelines and to help spark ideas. But really what my clients and a lot of the clients I've worked with, their clients and their target ICPs want something authentic and human. Have you also noticed similar trends?
Yeah, and there was a lot of conversation about that, and your creativity, being authentic. How do you maintain that while also trying to leverage AI? And yeah, and there's just a lot of little things that AI are not going to pick up on if you're really a subject matter expert in your respective industry or field. You're going to know the nuances of your customer and what really might resonate with them or what might seem phony. And so there's that deeper level of understanding and being able to connect that only comes, hopefully, right now, still with experience and really being, in living and breathing in a space. I don't know if that's going to change over time, but I still hang on to the importance of that human connection and that human knowledge, and that think AI still, doesn't deliver.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a great tool, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
And I'm curious your thoughts from one of the companies that you've worked with where you saw a video, specifically an ad or any sort of video content that really moved the needle and turned around your expectations even on the marketing campaign and really drove those conversions. Do you have any examples or stories that you'd like to share of watching that happen, in real time where you go to work on the strategy, the design, you roll it out, and it exceeds your expectations?
Yeah, it's always nice when that happens. It doesn't happen as much as marketers would probably
Right.
want them to happen. But, there was a time when I was at Hallmark, and we were launching what is now Hallmark Plus, their video streaming service, which is, basically like a family-friendly Netflix. And when we were first starting out, with Hallmark, they didn't have a lot of content. They had the Hallmark Hall of Fame movies and some other things. So they didn't have any Hollywood movies or even Hallmark TV shows, which they have
Sure.
now. They had a lot of short originals, but anyway, there was much less content at the time. They also were not on all the major platforms. They were on Roku, but they weren't on Apple TV. And anyway, we were trying to find our way, like what's the best way to reach our audience? And we ended up getting on Xbox and doing some tests with them, and that didn't work very well. And it wasn't surprising. Xbox was really more geared towards gamers, and Hallmark's more geared towards moms. And so
Yes.
that was a mismatch. But we ended up getting a chance to do a test on Roku. After being on the platform, but we hadn't been promoting on the platform, but then we've got the opportunity to do some advertising on Roku. And long
Right.
story short, we did a number of campaigns, but a video campaign that ended up featuring Betty White, who was in one of the Hallmark Hall of Fame movies, just really resonated. And it sort of speaks to the power of Betty White, right? She was beloved by everyone. Moms loved her. People of all ages, demographics, loved Betty White. And as soon as that campaign started to run, the number of signups, so we had a free trial sign up, it spiked tremendously. And it's like, wow, this is clearly working. And so I kind of talk about that now. It's like every brand is looking for that Betty White. Who's your Betty White? Or what's the person or the message or the imagery that's going to really resonate and grab your audience?
I love that. That recognition, I mean, she is a legend,
Yeah.
and having that recognition and pairing that with Hallmark
Yeah.
is definitely a win. So, looking back, Brad, what would be like the best advice that you'd give Brad starting out, in your first, let's say, enterprise industry that you're working in? What would be the best advice that you'd give yourself as a young marketer?
Yeah. I think this applies, I think, to not just marketing, but to almost any discipline. But I've been doing marketing long enough where when I first started out, I was marketing products that were sold at retail. And there was a lot of traditional marketing and TV and print and radio. And it was a very different landscape, right? And throughout my career, I started out in the video game industry, which did embrace digital early on. And so, we went from traditional media to pivoting towards digital media and then digital products and services. And you have to always be learning and you always have to be adapting. And because if you don't evolve, you're going to become extinct. Right. And I did see, unfortunately, some of my peers early on who were more, print or traditional media or retail experts, never were able to evolve and ended up, leaving marketing. And I think that's is a lesson, that you could apply to AI now, right? AI is just one example of another trend that's really impacting another tool that's really impacting marketers and lots of other people. And you can't, I know a lot of people don't have, are not happy about some of the side effects of AI and maybe people losing jobs. And there's certainly some backlash, which is deserved, but um, you can't turn away from it. You need to embrace it. You need to learn it. You need to be a marketer that's going to use the latest tools and technology, not the marketer who complains about the latest tools and technology.
I love that. Yes, always forward thinking, always
Mm.
bettering yourself. I think that's some solid advice.
Yeah.
And now, the clarity check.
I'm just going to ask you a few questions and would love your gut response. Could be one word or a sentence or two, but curious your thoughts on some of these things. And the first one has a lot to do with the content that I've seen from you. If you had to pick one, clicky or sticky, which one wins?
It definitely is sticky.
Yeah,
Mhm.
awesome. What's one metric that you secretly love that most marketers probably overlook?
Retention rates, and reducing churn. Yeah.
Awesome. What's some of the most overrated buzzwords that you hear that people are using to market their brands?
Uh, I don't know if it's overrated, but I've never been a fan of the term growth hacking. It just,
Yeah.
I just don't like
What
the
does that mean?
connotation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, it's just another example of, being strategic about growth and growing your brand cost effectively, that's something that small and medium-sized businesses have been doing forever. And just to sort of come up with a new term for it, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. Yep. Let's say if you have an option to fail fast or study endlessly, which one would you choose?
Yeah, you have to fail fast. I always say that it's okay to fail as long as you fail fast and you learn. Analysis is good, but studying endlessly is paralysis leading to, or leading to paralysis, which is, not a healthy thing. So
Analysis paralysis is the worst.
yes,
What's a marketing channel that you think is underrated in 2025?
it's not the sexiest and it's been around for a long time, but email is still very, very powerful.
Yeah. I feel like email is making a comeback. I feel like the past 5 years, it's kind of overrun its stay, and then it's slowly making its way back up, in my opinion. But I think if you do it right, then you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Especially with now the ability to really segment and personalize and retarget and all the things that we've been talking about. Really, email is a great way to take advantage of those tools.
Email can get your ICP sticky.
Yes.
And last one is clarity in one word. What would you describe, or in a sentence, like what is clarity to you as a marketer?
I, yeah, I mean it's alignment, right? I mean, because everyone could have a different definition of what success equals or what the most important goals are. So you need to be aligned on the key strategies or the key goals, and what success equals, and then that could everything ties back to that, right? And then it's really clear to explain why you're doing this or why you're doing X, Y, or Z, as long as everyone's aligned and in agreement on the goals and the outcomes.
Love it. Brad, thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on the Clarity Code.
Thanks for having me.
That was an incredible conversation with Brad, and one of the things I'm going to remember forever is creating content in our marketing that's clicky and sticky. It's not just about the vanity metrics, but it's about actually driving those conversions. And video plays a huge part in driving conversions. In fact, a huge percentage of conversion comes from the right video content in the right place in the funnel. So it's important that there's video content at top of funnel with your ads, video content mid-funnel driving the point home, and then the retention content, keeping customers a customer for life. I'm Brandon D. Marks. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Clarity Code. We'll see you next time.
Catch the Clarity Code on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.